are in listen-only mode.
Hello, everyone. This is Kate Newbanks with Faces of Virginia Families, and I have as another presenter with me, Therese Wolfe, who is a consultant, extremely knowledgeable about foster and adoptive policies in Virginia and the policies that are in place. A lot of them she has had a hand in writing. So we're quite fortunate to have Therese with us. We're going to do something a little bit different. Therese, can everybody hear me? Can you hear me, Therese?
I can.
Okay. We're going to do something a little bit different, everyone. We informed people of that during the opening chat to let people know that we are going to try to be a little bit more interactive right now. So just to make sure that I've got everybody on, for those of you that are on, please press your hand button to show us that you have a question. That's going to tell me that you are able to hear us and that we have that hand working, so we'll be able to see if you have questions as we're doing the presentation. I'm seeing hands of Tom. So Tom, you can put yours down. Randy, I see yours. You can put yours down. Lisa, I see yours. Kim, welcome, Kim Vlahos. Good to see you here. Joanne, I see your hand. So you guys can all put your hands down. Bonnie, I didn't see your hand up, so I'm hoping you can hear us. I'll be looking for that. Marianne, Randall, Margaret, I'm looking for your hands to see if you can hear us. Sometimes if you are on a telephone, you have to go into audio and change over to the phone as opposed to your computer speaker and microphone. So here is what we're going to do. We are going to do this presentation, but if you have a salient comment that you'd like to make about a point that we're making, something that emphasizes the point, or you have a question, put your hand up, and Therese and I will try to see when people have their hands up. And when we're at a point where we can stop and let you make that comment or ask that question, we will unmute you so that you can do that. We've never tried this before, so please be patient with us. You are also encouraged to write your questions, and at the end, we'll go over all of the written questions and try to answer those questions for you. I'm hoping that everyone can hear us. We are going to go ahead and get started. Again, thank you for being here. Today's presentation has had several different names as we've gone about the business of developing it, and we ended up on the name Impacting Child Welfare, Legislation, Regulation, Policy, and Guidance. We think it's important for advocates to understand the difference between these four different processes that exist for having an impact on child welfare. Our learning objectives, and do not know if you guys can see my control panel. I'm going to move it down a little bit. Our learning objectives today are to help the participants learn about the multiple processes that are currently available for changing the child welfare system, how to use specific tools for influencing legislation, regulation, policy, and guidance, such as FACES has an advocacy tool that we will show you a screen print of and let you see how that actually works. And then strategies for communicating as an advocate. It's sometimes not enough to send out that letter or that email to a legislator. You need to understand that it's important to develop a relationship, an open communication, and a respectful communication process with your legislator or your state public official. Okay, let me move this over. We're going to make sure that you understand here the differences. And of course, we understand, you all know the difference between a piece of federal legislation and a piece of state legislation, but I just want to give you a little bit more detail about that, is that federal legislation can set up laws and it can influence regulations at the state level. And they can influence the policies that have to be followed by the states and its citizens. One of the things that we run into when we're working with advocates is sometimes an advocate doesn't really know should they be writing to their state legislator about an issue or their congressperson. And when it's a federal piece, that's when it's really important to write to your congressperson. But there are times in which there might be an issue at your state that needs to be addressed legislatively that you still want to let your U.S. Congressperson know about. Then we have state legislation, and of course that influences. Pardon me?
Oh, I'm sorry. There are a couple of hands up, I think.
Okay.
Kim and Lisa.
Okay. Do you want to unmute one of them and see if there's something they wanted to add?
Well, I'm not sure it's letting me. Kim, can you hear me?
Let me try.
Okay.
Kim, I see your hand is up. Did you have something to add on the federal legislation piece or the state?
No, actually, it's not Kim. It's Paul Cole sitting in for Kim, but no, I don't have a question.
All right, thank you.
And Lisa?
Hey.
Lisa, did you have something you wanted to add?
I just wanted to ask if we should be seeing different slides than the title slide.
Yes.
Because I'm not.
Are you now?
Now I am.
Okay. Thank you so much for letting me know that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. All right. Okay, so let me know, Teresa, if you see anybody else, okay?
I will.
So the state legislation is, of course, what we basically do here in Virginia. Faces of Virginia Families is a family advocate organization, and we try to keep all of our members informed through advocacy alerts, and that's all generated around state legislation. Then you have VDSS regulation. What it's important for advocates to know is that regulation has the impact of law. So if a piece of legislation comes forward and the decision is to develop regulation, or the legislature says to develop regulation around the issue, when that regulation goes through the entire process, it goes through a public hearing process, much like legislation does, only it happens all year long. And that when that has gone through its entire process and been signed off on by the governor, it has the same force of law. So that's a very important part of the puzzle that you'll hear about tonight, that Teresa will talk about, different ways that you can impact that regulation process. Then there are VDSS policies. The VDSS policies are set out to establish the plans for carrying out programs, and all the policies that are implemented in Virginia for the Virginia Department of Social Services have to be approved by the State Board of Social Services. So they're a little bit more than telling agencies what you would like them to do. The policy means this is what you are supposed to do. It does not have the impact of law, mainly because it does not go through the entire process that a regulation goes through. Then you have guidance, which is advice. You can see guidance around things like how best practices should be implemented. You might see guidance around family engagement. But it's basically telling you, this is what you local agencies and private agencies, this is what we think you ought to do. This is what we'd like to see you do. This is consistent with our mission and our values. And all of the guidance is all approved by the Department of Social Services Commissioner, who is right now Margaret Schultz. I'm going to talk a little bit about U.S. Congress, which of course is where the federal legislation comes into play. And of course, many of you know the U.S. Congress is a full-time lawmaking body as opposed to the part-time lawmaking body of Virginia. The laws are passed by Congress, they're signed into law by the president, and they're referred to as public acts. Once a federal law is implemented or passed by Congress and signed by the president, it could take months or even years for it to actually be implemented, because it many times has to go through a regulatory process at the federal level, or there have to be commissioner directives to let people know what they're supposed to be doing, what different agencies know what they're supposed to be doing. And while it is important that you have an advocacy relationship with your members of Congress, we want to underscore to people that oftentimes you will reach out to members of Congress and you won't get them. You're going to get their legislative staff. We encourage you to treat those legislative staff just like they were the member of Congress. The legislative staff are really the eyes and the ears of that member of Congress. If they take your position, if they hear what you are saying, if they feel what you're saying is important, they're going to make sure it gets in front of that member of Congress. So For example, if you were ever going to send flowers to somebody, if you're going to send flowers to your boss, it's always important to send them to the secretary. Same thing goes for Congress and legislative staff. You have to make sure you have an equally positive relationship with that legislative staff person. And many times they'll have a number of legislative staff people who are legislative staff on different issues. And while it is important on occasion to go to DC and visit with your member of Congress, it can be even more important and vital to the advocacy effort for you to visit with your member of Congress when they're in your home district. Making sure that they see you, that they know you're there, that when you're at an event that they're at, that you have a chance to go up and just say, hi, I'm a foster parent, or I'm an adoptive parent. We're really grateful for all the work that happened in Congress on fostering connections, or whatever else you might want to say. Make some sort of a connection. Make sure that sometimes those connections are positive, not always telling them what they've done wrong or how wrong they voted on something, but making sure that you're making a positive impact with them. When you are communicating with your member of Congress, you need to be sure that your letters and your emails are very specific. Sending a member of Congress an email that says, we think that foster care needs to have more funding in this country, is not going to get you the kind of attention that's going to get you if you say, in Virginia, we have, let's just take, for example, never had a rate increase. Isn't it time that Congress mandate a law that, create a law that tells all the states that they have to follow some sort of a cost of living adjustment for foster care rates consistent with the court judgment that happened in California? Not that you would necessarily say that, but that's an example of being very specific about what you were looking for. Too much generality, and it's not an email or a letter that's going to have anything to do with getting anything done. Also, it does very little good if you send a letter to Congress that you're in an outrage about something. Basically, if you're writing and saying, I hate this, this is horrible, this is the worst thing that could ever happen, it's not going to get the kind of attention unless it is something that has become very public and there are hundreds of people who are writing who are outraged because it is terrible. The letter of outrage should be saved for when you have a groundswell of supporters who are trying to make a difference, trying to make a change. If your numbers are small, then make your letters and your calls very specific and offer ideas. Make sure that your ideas are real. Writing a letter to Congress and saying the Defense Department ought to have bake sales and child welfare ought to get full open funding is not going to get much attention. I know that's a ridiculous example, but it is an example to help you see that you really have to make sure that when you're making a suggestion, you're making it a real suggestion. Therese, anybody have any comments or questions yet?
No.
Okay. There has been a study done by the Educational Resource Information Center that talked about what are the things that influence congressional votes. Specifically, they were looking at the issues around secondary education, primary and secondary education, but it really applies to all the children's issues. So this bracket where I have on children's issues is really our addition to that. They're basically studied this on the issue of only primary and secondary education. But it's important. It's important to understand, and this is all in order of how Congress makes their decisions, because this is very well researched, and I've credited the researcher on this at the bottom of the screen. Their personal judgment and their values are usually things that influence Congress and their staff. If you are, and I'm not really sure what they mean by no more than 6 to 10 members of Congress and staff, I hope that they're in just, hopefully more than 6 to 10 members of Congress are using their personal judgment and values. But almost everyone makes their decision based upon where they see the issues and what they personally value. And that's kind of how you elect them. You elect them based upon what their personal values are. Then strong views of respected and trusted friends. This is why it is very important to know people at a personal level, to know people in their districts. Once you become a respected and trusted friend of either the staff or the legislator, they put more stock in what you have to say. They use assumptions about the economy and the budget to influence their decisions, public opinion, and popular media. I'm going to skip on down because I want to make sure that you see this part. One of the last things that influences their decisions are program evaluation studies. Isn't that amazing? We all talk about how much impact it would be if we could fully fund foster care and what impact that would have over children's lives for the rest of their lives into adulthood. And we have all sorts of program evaluation studies that say that. And yet we still don't have full funding for foster care. So it really does have more to do with how they feel about the economy and the budget, who's getting most of the attention, and all of the different pieces of pie that they have to create out of one pot of money. So I just think that's an important slide for you to really understand how they're making their decisions, so that when you write your letter, when you make your phone call, you try to make sure you are hitting those high level items, such as if you know somebody who's a great friend with that legislator who really believes in what you're saying, ask them to co-sign the letter with you. That could make a big difference. Now we talk about the Virginia General Assembly. And as many of you know, that's a part-time lawmaking body. Those legislators all have full-time jobs that they go back to after the General Assembly is over. They work mainly during the General Assembly in Richmond from January to either February or March, depending upon whether it's a short session or a long session. This year it was a short session. Next year it will be a long session, so it flips between the 2 years. One of the things that we want to make sure that people understand is that there is a House Appropriations and a Senate Finance Committee. Those two committees have members from all over the state who sit on them. Members of the General Assembly sit on those. And one of the things we want you to understand is when it comes to budget issues, even if a member of the committee is not in your district, they still expect to hear from constituents all over Virginia. You don't have to say, well, I can't do anything about the budget because my General Assembly member is not on appropriations or the finance committees. That does not happen to be true in those two committees. The chair of both of those committees expects that he will hear from people all over Virginia, as do the committee members. And some of the most important people on those committees, and don't tell any legislator I said this, but some of the most important people on those committees are the staff. So it is important that if you have something to say about the budget or you have facts to share about the budget, getting that to the committee staff members is equally as important as getting it to your legislators, because they can help, if they have a good relationship with you, they can help get it in front of the right people. When it comes to substantive, which actually means that it has a program component or it has a value component not related to money, then most of our committees that we work with are the House Health, Welfare, and Institutions Committee and the Senate Rehab and Social Services Committee. When you have a bill before any of those committees, if you have a House bill, it first goes to the House committee to get out of the House, then it goes on to the House floor where they have several opportunities to put that through or defeat that. And then it goes over to the Senate, who then has to do the same process. They have to get it through the committee, and then it has to go back to the Senate floor where they have several opportunities to either pass it or defeat it there. Then after that, of course, it goes on to the governor if it has been passed. But those are the primary committees that we work with on child welfare issues here in Virginia. Although we do often have times where we have a bill in front of the courts committee or education committees. For example, this year we had, again, the kinship enrollment bill, which was a very important child welfare bill, and it was before the education committee. It is vital for advocates to have a positive relationship with their legislators in their home district. Just as it is with Congress, your legislator needs to see you at home. He needs to see you at the ballgame. He needs to see you at the Rotary Club. She needs to see you at the school. Wherever they are in their home district, that is really the key, because we do have a part-time General Assembly. And when you are coming to the Capitol, it is important that you are very issue-focused, that you don't just come to the Capitol, but you follow that up with the home district presence. Oftentimes, you will have letters that you will send to legislators. You will have emails that you will send. You'll make phone calls. One of the most important things you can do, especially if you are coming to Richmond, is to always be sure you have a 60-second elevator speech ready. So if you happen to see your legislator in the elevator specifically, or oftentimes what can happen is you go to meet with your legislators, I don't have time to meet with you right now, but you can walk with me. So basically you need your 60-second elevator speech so that you can walk with them and explain. It doesn't hurt to have a typewritten note card with you that you can hand off to them when you're done. They can give, and you can turn back around and go to their legislative staff and give that legislative staff person that typewritten note card or that fact sheet. But make sure that you bullet point what it is that you want done, why it needs to be done, and how things will be better because of them voting the way you're asking them to vote. Those are the important components of your 60-second elevator speech. And as with Congress, you need to keep your message on point. Ranting and raving does little to help the cause. You have to be very specific, and you have to be respectful of the fact that they have a lot of people wanting them to do a lot of different things, and they aren't all things that will work well together. You have people asking them to do one thing and people asking them to do the very opposite. So it's very important to be very structured and positive, and make sure that they don't think of you as just somebody who's ranting and raving about an issue. Anybody yet, Therese?
Nope.
All right. Now I've worked with the American Academy of Pediatrics a few different times, and they have a great tip sheet for advocating, and it's for any legislative process. So we encourage you to review this. I could read it to you, and I will go through a little bit of it. I'm not going to read it verbatim to you. But make sure that you choose your issue. Make sure you have a personal experience that goes along with it, that you know how it affects your community, and that you really know what it is you'd like to have changed. Know your issue front, side, back side, and upside down. Because the time that you don't, they're going to ask you a question that you're not going to have an answer to, and you may have lost their interest. So you've really got to have somebody who's maybe a devil's advocate. Sorry if that expression offends anybody. Have somebody who's a devil's advocate that says, okay, well, I'm going to talk about my issue to you, and you ask me questions that I might not think about, I might not have got answers for, so that you can try to think of how that legislator might be thinking. Identify the solutions. One of the things that legislators need to hear is that there are ways to fix a problem, and they don't always have the answers. So when you have some ideas, those are important things to share. It's very important that you have supporters, not just people who are going to the Capitol with you on an issue, but people who are making phone calls in the home district, people who are friends with people who know the legislative staff or the legislator. Look at the internet, find other organizations that are working on key issues. We've done that a lot with the issues of education and mental health in Virginia. We've got coalitions for kids all over the place trying to make sure that we're getting the right laws passed for all children. And just because all of their issues may not mesh with what you're interested in, they can, if they are interested in what you're interested in, they can be a big force and an important supporter for getting the champion out the issue to the legislator or to government officials. Have a strategy. Make sure you know who's opposing you and what it is that needs to be done to neutralize that opposition. You need to know the questions and the answers and the issues from the other side of an issue, not just from your side of the issue. That's part of developing your strategy. Frame your message. Make sure that it's clear, concise, and to the point. Education starts at the community level. Grassroots is ever so important in changing laws in Virginia or anywhere else. You need to make sure that there are community, state, and national organization meetings that you're aware of, things that are happening, laws that are changing. An example is fosteringconnections.org is a great website to see what other states are doing about implementing fostering connections. So that if you have an issue, you can look at that and say, hey, why is Virginia not doing subsidized custody for relatives? 5 other states, 10 other states are doing, I think it's 10 other states, are doing subsidized custody so that relatives can, after 6 months of being foster parents, can take custody of the children and still get their foster care payments. Why doesn't Virginia do that? You will get more information by looking at fosteringconnections.org, for example, and finding out what other people are doing, writing letters to your newspaper, informing other community groups. Those are ways to enlist support and action. It's really important. I think we all have heard democracy is not a spectator sport. It's not, and I've heard it also said, it's not for the weak of heart. You have to have a strong conviction. You have to be willing to activate emails and telephone trees and really get into the grassroots of an issue and really make it grow into something that's big enough to get the attention of your lawmakers. Testifying is very important. You have a chance to offer your story at public hearings. I will tell you that it is very important that when you are telling your personal story, that you don't tell a personal story that takes up 5 pages, but you think of it as your 60-second elevator speech, and you can go a little longer. But try not to have anything longer than 1 page of a personal story. When you go up there to testify and you've got 5 pages in front of you that you're going to read to them, it's not for them, it's not coming from your heart. You have to know your personal story well enough to be able to tell it and tell it succinctly and to the point, and it has to be on message. It has to be related to the piece of legislation that has come forward. One of the things that I will tell you in this past General Assembly, the Lyme's disease people were very on point. They all wore green t-shirts. They had Lyme disease signs. They had selected certain people who are going to get up and talk, and those people had a personal story that they told from their hearts, and they did not take 20 minutes to tell them, because when they get up there to testify, generally, if there are a lot of people in the room, the legislators are going to say, you have 1 minute. So you need to know that whatever points you want to make, whatever personal story you want to tell, you need to be able to tell it in 1 to 2 minutes when it comes to testifying. Not when it comes to visiting them in their office or visiting with their staff, but if you're going to get up front and testify. And then, of course, the old adage, don't give up. Eternal vigilance is the price of freedom, as Thomas Jefferson said, and it takes more than 1 attempt to get a law passed. Last year, we worked on the kinship enrollment bill. We got it through all of the House and the Senate. After many, many different reiterations of the bill, the governor line item vetoed it. It went back to the General Assembly. The General Assembly sent it back, did not accept his amendment, and then he vetoed it. This year, it came back. We got it through both House and Senate again. We don't know what's going to happen with the governor's office, but we will keep coming back with this law until we are successful. We have a very committed legislator, and that's part of the key to advocating in the General Assembly, is knowing who are the key advocates in the General Assembly. Senator Barker, Senator Favola, they are very important in the Senate when it comes to our issues. Delegate O'Bannon, and I'm sure there are others that are just not coming to mind right now, but there are delegates on our side as well. And Delegate Orrock is always good about carrying bills for us. So you have to find the right legislator, and then you cannot give up. And you have to keep asking them, what can I do? What help do you need to help get this passed? Sometimes they'll need you to make visits. Sometimes they'll need you to make phone calls. Sometimes they need you to just lay low while they become statespeople and try to get it through. And then, of course, last but never least is vote. And make sure that you take a child with you. You know how we're all trying to raise children up to be important citizens in their community and be productive citizens. Take children with you when you vote so they see the importance of that. Voting is vital to the legislative and democratic process. Anyone yet, Therese?
No, Kate.
All right, thanks. All right. Now the other piece is that we have a tool for you. If any of you have visited the FACES website, you will see that we have an advocacy page. It is it's one of the tabs toward the top of the page that says advocacy. And in that advocacy page, you are able to put in your address and your zip code, and it will tell you exactly who your U.S. representatives and your state legislators are for your address. And then you will have, from there, you will be able to directly email them from our page. It won't have a FACES logo on it. It'll just be an email from you, but you won't have to go searching for how to talk to your legislators. It's already there. You just put that in there. It'll save it for you if you ask it to. And at any time you want to send something to a legislator, all you do is, like, if I wanted to click on sending something to Governor McDonnell and I was on the website, I could click on that and it would give me an email to be able to send whatever I wanted to Governor McDonnell. The other things that you need to know that are there, we have a number of policies and tools and directories. You can search for members of your Board of Supervisors that regulate your Department of Social Services, your local department. You can find all of the media. You can actually go to the very top of the page where it says media. You can click on that and you can actually send an email to the editor of any of those newspapers about your issue. You don't have to go searching for it anywhere else. It's all right there on that page. I don't think that very many FACES members have actually been using much of that, and I would love to see more people using it. We're going to be doing an upgrade to that page, and it will be even more interesting. But know that if you use that advocacy page, you can go right to media, boards of supervisors, the governor, your senators, your congressman. You can go right to them with an email address. The other thing we always encourage everyone to do when it comes to legislation is be very familiar and bookmark the virginiageneralassembly.gov site. That site will allow you to search by way of a bill number, or you can go into it and search by keyword. If you put in foster care during General Assembly session, it'll tell you how many bills have the term foster care in them so that you can take a look at them. It's a very important website to familiarize yourself with. I'm now going to turn it over to Therese, who's going to talk to you about regulation, policy, and guidance. Thank you, Therese.
Thanks, Kate. Regulation is probably something people know less about because it doesn't get the kind of attention that the General Assembly gets. But regulations, as Kate said, they are enacted differently than the way the law is enacted, but they carry the force and effect of law. So technically, in Virginia, you have the Code of Virginia, which is what the laws the General Assembly passes, and then you have the Administrative Code of Virginia, which lists all these regulations. And regulations tend to be overlooked a lot, but they are more specific often than the code, and they're real important in terms of understanding what is directing foster care and adoption processes in the state. Regulations do not always exist either. It's interesting to note that we tend to have a lot of regulations in Virginia, as do most states, but even though the Code of Virginia says we should have foster care regulations, we only had foster care regulations beginning November 1st of 2012. Prior to that, there were basically no regulations around foster care. So all you had was what was in the Code of Virginia, and then finally the state did enact regulations that provided more specific guidance directed to foster care and adoption. So one of the things that relates back to what Kate was talking about with legislation is that when there are new bills going forward in the General Assembly, one of the things we can do, or you can do as advocates, is to ask that they put instructions in those bills that tell the state that they need to develop regulations regarding those bills. Again, because the regulations give some more specific direction to how the law should be carried out, it's often important to have that regulation developed. And if it's part of the actual law, instructing the department to establish regulations, it's more likely the regulations will be developed. Typically, the way you can ask for that to happen is to talk to the bill's patron, or as Kate mentioned earlier, the staff of that patron, and let them know that you would like language to be included instructing the State Board of Social Services to develop regulations. Typically, that's how it's written in the law. It's because the State Board of Social Services, the body that has to look at those regulations and approve them before they finally go to the governor, typically the way the law will say to develop regulations is they'll instruct the State Board to do so. You can also ask for a specific time period in which regulations must be developed. One of the interesting things between the state law and regulations is state laws, as you know, get created during the General Assembly season and they go into effect by July 1st of the next year, usually. Regulations can take a year to 18 months to go into effect, and sometimes even longer than that. And so it's also a good idea to ask the bill patron to set a time frame for which those regulations must be developed. In the current General Assembly that just finished, there was a foster care bill that passed, and it was a bill having to do with the right to appeal service denials for children in foster care. And that bill has an instruction that says regulations must be developed in the next 280 days. So that instruction is making it very clear that the state can't go for 2 or 3 years before they do the regulations. They have to do them soon. Okay, you want to go to the next slide?
Oh, yes, 1 second.
I'm assuming you have to. I don't know that I can.
Okay. Are we at the next slide? There. Is that the next one?
Nope.
Which one do you want?
I think it's about monitoring regulations. I don't know why it's not moving.
You don't see it moving?
No.
Hold on. How's that?
There we go. Now.
Where are we?
Okay, go again. Now yeah, there we are.
Okay. Sorry, everybody.
Okay, that's okay. One of the ways that you can impact regulations too is that once they are being developed is to provide comment on regulations. And one of the things I will tell you is the regulatory process is kind of a nightmare, meaning that it's lengthy. There's a lot of bureaucratic paperwork that gets done at the state level in order to move it forward, and you can get very caught up in that and trying to understand what all that paperwork is. But if you go into what's called the Regulatory Town Hall site, and that the website is on this slide at the very top, you can follow the development of regulations at that website. And one of the best ways to do that is to register as a public user. And that part's very easy. When you go to that website, you'll see a place where it says register as a public user. By doing that, you can identify the regulations you want to follow, and there aren't a lot of them. So, you know, if you're looking at foster care and adoption, right now, or within the next few months, there will be a couple of regulations coming forward. So you would only be following maybe 1 or 2 regulations. But by registering as a public user, you're going to get emails at varying times telling you that some new action has happened. So that'd be a good clue to you to go back in and look at what's going on. all regulations allow a public comment period. And the public comment period it's an email or a letter writing public comment period. And they are usually for 60 days, and it will be on the regulatory site, and it will tell you that the proposed regulations are available for you to read, and there is a 60-day period in which you can write public comment. They will give you the email address of the person who you can send your comments to. And I can't stress enough how important it is to write those public comments and to email them in. And a lot of what Kate said earlier about, you know, be brief, be concise, don't rant and rave, be very specific, those are really important things to do in your public comment. 2 years ago, the Division of Licensing at the Department of Social Services had a regulation that was out, and it had some issues in it that created quite a bit of controversy for a lot of people in Virginia. And the department received over 1,100 comments from the public about those regulations. And those comments have to be responded to by the department. They have to be considered in the final draft of the regulations. So your public comment really is paid attention to. Not all regulations, but some regulations also have face-to-face town hall meetings, especially if the regulation is something that's brand new, if it's a regulation that it is suspected to have perhaps some controversy. Often the department will arrange some town hall meetings, usually in Richmond, maybe in another local area, in order to invite people to come to the town hall meeting and have a discussion about their areas of concern. It is a really, really good idea to go to those town hall meetings, again, if that's a regulation that you have some real concerns about. It's also a good idea, if you're going to do that, if you can marshal additional forces to go with you. If there's, you know, a group of foster parents or a group of adoptive parents who go and speak up, that's also a very wise way to influence regulations. We've talked a lot already about being specific, but I'm giving you a couple of examples here because these are really based on comments we've heard in the past. What you do want to say, whether it's in an email or whether it's at the public or the town hall meeting, you want to be as specific as you can, which a good way to do that is to write it down before you go. And you want to say something like, Section 120 of this regulation does not include foster parents' participation in the service plan meetings. And if foster parents are not included, we can't help the local social services departments know what the child's needs are. You're very specifically telling them what part of the regulation is a problem. You're telling them what it is or is not doing and why that omission is potentially a problem. And that's what they need to hear. We've also seen comments from people that you don't want to do, such as, I think these regs don't change anything and won't help kids get what they need. That doesn't tell the state what is problematic about the reg. It doesn't tell them what to change. So as a result, that kind of a comment is not going to influence the language of the regulation at all.
Teresa, I think that on the do part that you were talking about, I think it would also, not that it's always the case, but sometimes you might even have a suggestion on how the wording would be better that you can provide in the comment also.
Yeah, that's a very good point, Kate. And you can do that, again, you can do that whether it's an email comment or a public comment. If you're at a face-to-face town hall meeting, you can actually turn something like that in so that they have your suggested language. And that we have used that before. We've made some changes to regulations that take the actual verbiage from citizens. It's a very good point.
Okay. Next screen.
Okay. Please. One of the other ways that you can then continue to impact the regulations is to influence the State Board of Social Services. You can learn more about the State Board of Social Services at the website that I've put on this slide. Just want to tell you real briefly, most of, if not all, of our state agencies have some kind of a state board. And there are 3 different types of state boards, and I won't go into all of them, but what I will tell you is that the State Board of Social Services is called a policy board, which means they take a very active role in things like approving regulations, approving policy. They spend a lot of time, they don't serve as an advisory group to the Department of Social Services. They really serve as an active policy approving group. So it behooves you to learn about the State Board of Social Services. And part of that is because you have a right to be at their meetings and to comment on things that you are concerned about. So the more you learn about the State Board of Social Services, the more you will also discover on that website is their agenda for the agenda for their meetings. So you can monitor when they meet. They typically meet every other month. And you can attend those state board meetings, not just when regulations are being discussed, but certainly that's one of the times you might want to attend. When you are at the state board meeting, you can speak up to the regulations. They ask you to sign in if you're there so that they know that you are there to provide public comment. And if you can't attend the meeting, you can also send in your public comment. The website that, again, is on this slide has an FAQ section that actually provides some pretty valuable information about helping you understand participating in state board meetings. And that's also where you can read about the minutes from the last meeting. You can find out whether or not any policies or regulations are going to be brought up at the next meeting and where the meeting will be at, what time, all of that. So, and the state board is a little bit more willing to listen to more public comment than the General Assembly because they're not moving as quickly as the General Assembly. You still want to be, you want to be very concise, you want to be very specific in what you're saying, but again, you can go to those meetings and provide that level of public comment. And Kate, I have a quick poll in front of me, so I'm not sure what our next slide is.
That's okay. Take your poll.
Oh, I have to too?
Mm-hmm.
It's not letting me. Okay. The next step from regulation then is policy and guidance. And my suspicion is that most of you who are on this webinar have heard a lot more about policy and guidance, certainly than regulation. But foster care and adoption policy or guidance is updated several different times during the year. It can always be updated or state laws are passed that seriously change practice. Kate referred earlier to the Fostering Connections Law. Again, I think you've all probably heard a lot about that for the last several years. That has caused a lot of revisions in guidance for the state. And then when new federal or state regulations go into effect, that also can create a need for new policy or new guidance. And the final piece is new practices that are being adopted or encouraged. In the last several years, I suspect, again, many of you have done or participated in a family partnership meeting. Some of you may have been involved in concurrent planning. There are a number of different kinds of practices in social work that will find their way into our policy or our guidance manual because they've been identified as best practice. It's something that we really want to encourage workers throughout the state to be involved in. Now, policy or guidance is updated at least by July 1st every year, but that update focuses mainly on any new state laws or regulations that were passed in the General Assembly of that year. And then policy or guidance can be updated kind of any other time. It depends what's happening in the legislative world. in the last few years, we've had so many new laws regarding foster care and adoption that there's been a lot of revision to the manuals. And both the foster care and the adoption manual have been significantly rewritten and will be coming out in the near future. If you want to go to the next slide, Kate, thank you. So how do you play a role in all of that? One of the things that you can do is ask to be a member of the Permanency Advisory Committee. And the Permanency Advisory Committee is a group of mostly local Department of Social Services representatives, but then some other representatives or stakeholders such as yourselves, someone from FACES, perhaps from a couple of other child advocacy organizations. And the Permanency Advisory Committee meets about every second or third month, depending on how much work there is to do. But the PAC is responsible to assist the state in providing guidance for foster care and adoption based on new laws and new practices that are coming forward. If you want to go that route, it's also important, though, that you're knowledgeable and that you're real clear about what policy or practice is. Read the current guidance on the department's website. You learn about some of the new laws and regulations. You can certainly ask the department through the PAC meeting or even through FACES if draft guidance is available for review. So you're basing any recommendations you have for policy changes on fact, not just on how you feel about things. One of the experiences that we've had at the state office at times has been that people have emailed or come to us with suggestions about something that needs to be in the foster care practice. And what we discover is it already is. They just didn't know it was already in the manual. So knowing what's already in existence is real important in terms of you being able to offer additional suggestions. The other way that being involved in the PAC is really making a pretty strong commitment, because you're coming to the meetings when we have them. If you are a member of the PAC, you would be reading some materials in between meetings, some of the policy work being done. But there are other ways that you can also influence policy, and one of those is to write letters or emails to the Commissioner of the Department of Social Services, to the Division of Family Services Director at the department, the Permanency Program Manager. You can also write to your state legislators, the Secretary of Health and Human Resources, and even the Governor regarding your recommendations. Those letters do not go unanswered. It might take a while to get an answer, but whoever you write those letters to, they will come back to the Department of Social Services asking you to respond. And so it's important when you write those letters to think about what we just talked about a few minutes ago too. Be knowledgeable about what already exists, because if you're writing to the commissioner or the governor and telling them that they need to make sure that foster care caseworkers visit the child once a month, that's already the law, that's already the guidance, the policy that people have to follow. So you want to make sure that if you're writing in about a concern or a complaint or a recommendation, that it isn't already something that's been dealt with. You can also make group recommendations. There truly is power in numbers. Several months ago, again, I'm going to suspect that this rings a bell for some of you, when the commissioner was looking at reducing the rates that were being paid for the VMAT. There was a lot of discussion in the state about reducing those rates really significantly, potentially up to about 70%. There were 2 instances where groups of foster and adoptive parents very appropriately, very professionally contacted the commissioner, first by letter, then by phone call, and arranged to come in and meet with him. Those group recommendations also had something of an influence in how much the VMAT was actually cut. You also have the right as citizens in Virginia to attend a couple of different meetings that focus on a lot of issues related to children. And that's the State Executive Council, or they call it the SEC, which is meeting tomorrow, by the way, and the State and Local Advisory Team, or the SLAT. And the SLAT meets every other month. And you can also read their meeting minutes so that you know what they've talked about and you know what is on the agenda for the next meeting. So you can find their meeting dates, their agendas, their minutes at the website that you see on the slide. One of the important things about attending these meetings, reading the minutes, paying attention to the agenda, is that a number of policies related to CSA, the Comprehensive Services Act, is decided by these groups. And for example, at tomorrow's State Executive Council meeting, there's a policy about the use of CSA funds for children in foster care and other children based on some Medicaid rules. And without going into details, it's important to understand that the services that are available or not available to the children placed in your home are often decided at these meetings. So there's a lot of other information that influences policy and guidance at the state that you can learn about through the SEC and the SLAT. And that's it for that slide, Kate.
Okay.
All of these revisions to policy and guidance are completed at the department by the foster care or adoption program manager and the policy staff. And I think this is just a reminder that as that policy or as that guidance is completed, it is based on input from the Permanency Advisory Committee, again, which I discussed earlier. Other divisions in the Department of Social Services. We always want to make sure, the department wants to make sure that one division is consistent with another. Federal policy and law also influences the policy or the guidance that comes out of the department. And then other child serving agencies, the Court Improvement Program, CSA, FACES, other child advocacy groups, all have some input into the policy that exists right now. It's important. The department also reviews other states' policies because oftentimes other states may have already developed a policy that Virginia's now just trying to come up with, and so we would often look at what other states do as well. I just wanted to summarize these pieces for you because if you notice, the first thing that is the most important is the Permanency Advisory Committee. And again, that group is pretty near and dear to my heart in terms of how important it was when we were working with them to develop policy. And that group continues to go forward. And one of the things that is valued strongly is to have a foster and adoptive parent on that group. And you carry the message of kind of your whole community when you attend the PAC and can provide information from all of you if you are a part of that group. I also would suggest that if you learn who is the program managers and who the policy staff are at the department, you can always send them an email with suggestions that you might have. And Kate, I didn't put their names or emails on here, but that's something that I think you could certainly provide if you needed to, if people wanted to know who those folks were and how to email them.
Okay. And one of the things that I will let everybody know is the department has recently asked FACES again. We oftentimes provide foster, adoptive, and kinship families for their committees. They are now looking for some more foster, adoptive, and kinship families to serve on some committees. So if you have an interest in serving on a committee, at the end of the slide, you're going to have my email address, and at the PowerPoint, you'll have my email address, and you can send me your contact information, what specific area you're interested in the area of reforming child welfare, and we will try to match you with the right committee.
And if you're going to do that, keep in mind too that you're not signing on for the rest of your life. I know the Permanency Advisory Committee, for example, asked you if you can do 2 years on that committee. That could change, but always keep in mind that if someone doesn't ask you should ask about how long is the commitment so that you really know what you are committing to and for how long.
Okay. Next slide.
Please.
All right. And so we leave you with this thought. Your influence is limited only by your voice, your perseverance, and your story. Keep in mind that influence does not always result in legislative or regulatory action, but it can change the mind of people who may later raise up to change the world. And that's what advocates do from the grassroots on up. So we thank you all for attending. If you need a training certificate for this training session, which will be for a 1-hour training, please send your request to me at cnewbanks@fovf.org, as you see on the screen. I want to thank Therese again for assisting us with this presentation and our participants for their active listening and their questions. And I'm now going to open up the floor to those questions. While I'm doing that, I'm going to throw another poll at y'all and ask you, let's see, another question. Here we go. And while we're doing that, let's see if we have any questions. And please type up your questions. One of the questions that we had is, will we have access to these slides, particularly the ones with the 10 tips? Absolutely, on our website. Takes about 2 days for us to get it there, but we already have a Wednesday webinar archive that's on our training page. You can click there and you can register for any of the past webinars. We have you register just so we can keep track of who's watching and who's paying attention to them, because that gives us feedback about what we need to do differently and how we can improve, and also gives us numbers so we can report back to our funders. All right, so I'm going to close that poll, see if we have any more questions. Looks like people are telling us they're getting some new information. They're getting some information that's going to help them take action later. That's all good to know. Any questions before we close out the session? All right. We'll use my email address there to give us any feedback about the presentation you might like to give us offline, and ask for your training certificate if you need one, and give us suggestions for any future webinars. We are going to be doing a webinar next week on negotiating, different strategies and tips for how to handle the child welfare conversations that you often have to have. And I see I've got a hand raised for a question, so let me see. Okay, Mr. Tom, just a second. I'm going to unmute you, Mr. Tom. Where are you, Tom? Oh, I don't have a hand raised. I could see a question. All right, I'm going to unmute you now, Tom. Okay,
right,
Tom.
thanks.
Hi.
All right, thanks, Kate. Miss Susie, my wife, has got a question for you, okay?
Hi, Miss Susie. Haven't seen you in a while.
I know, Kate. We appreciate the information from you and Therese as well.
Thank you.
And just a couple of questions. The regulation process is commendable, and there's a lot of people that are doing some really good work at trying to make it better for our foster and adoptive kids. Regretfully, it still appears that the regulations only go as far as the state, and in particular in our area, the local social service agencies that most of the foster parents and adoptive parents deal with operate in many cases autonomously. Is that still the case, or are there any movements to making the regulations stronger by including everyone and making everyone accountable to the same process?
Well, the regulations are statewide, and so nobody has a choice to make about whether or not they want to follow a regulation. I think that where the issue is, and correct me if I'm wrong, Therese, is that oftentimes guidance is, you may do this if you like to, and it's not required by the state. Would you like to add something to that, Therese?
I think you're right, Kate. One of the things I would hope people pay attention to is in guidance, if it says shall, it means that whatever they are being instructed to do comes from regulation or law, and they have no choice. If it says may or should, then the localities really do have some choice. And I think it's important to figure out if the locality is not following the law or regulation, or if they are operating based on that may. Because if they are not following the law and they're not doing what's expected, then there are some avenues that you can take to address that with the agency or with the regional director.
Susie, did that answer your question?
Yes, Kate. It's noble, but I know of instances where there've foster families who have been faced with the may have had a problem getting things resolved, and I think we've lost very good foster parents because of that. And I don't know whether it's within your framework or within the framework of other advocacy groups to tighten that may policy up so that it's more uniform from agency to agency. And I think it's a very serious issue for losing a lot of good foster parents when they feel like no one listens to them, and issues are faced that you may bring to the state, but you get that concept of, well, it's not written as a regulation or a law. And I'm hoping that maybe down the road the Assembly will begin to look at tightening up the individual agencies' responsibility and making them more uniform.
I think there have been some efforts to try that and haven't gotten very far. What I think would be really helpful for us, Susie and Tom, is if you could give us some examples of some of the mays that you think are the ones that, maybe the top 10 mays that we ought to be focusing on, that we could maybe create some advocacy efforts around that. Would that be something you could do?
Yes, I think we could. We could give you some suggestions as far as the transitioning, particularly of children. That is a very important thing to us. Yeah.
That'd be great. So giving us a list of maybe your top 10 mays, and let us see what maybe can be done. Okay.
Thank you very much.
Did you have something else?
This is a really good time to act on that, because they're called the Permanency Regulations, but they are the new regulations that cover all of foster care and all of adoption. And they went into effect November 1st. They're being opened back up again to redo them. So this is a great time for people to start talking about what inconsistencies maybe need to be addressed as these regulations are revised.
Great. And Tom, Susie, did you guys have a second question?
Yeah, we can address that to you, can't we, at Faces, and you could forward it on for us?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
My other question is, and I'm not aware of it, but I know within our local foster and adoptive group, we've seen a very large decline in the number of foster and adoptive parent attendees. And I wondered if, and I don't have knowledge of it, but have you found that because of the movement toward family foster care, that we have lost foster parents, or that the policy within the state has been to move more toward family foster care than attracting new foster parents?
Are you talking about relatives?
Yes.
Yeah, I think that there is a movement across the entire country as a result of fostering connections and the research that shows children do better with relatives, to continue to try to find more and more relatives that children can be placed with. One of the things that we have brought up as a matter of an issue is that the fostering connections requires that these families be sought out after within 30 days of the children being removed from home. Sometimes people are still searching for families 2 and 3 years into the foster care placement just prior to the adoption, and children's stability is being disrupted. Now, I'm a big supporter of kinship families and relative placements. I think that the issue is that we have to find those families early and quickly so that we can start making those placements and not be disrupting children. I do think that there is a movement across the country, and it's coming from federal legislation impacting all of the states, is that we have to be finding families and letting children be raised by members of their family. And that is happening more and more. And
financially supporting them. And this is one of our problems here in Virginia, that these are grandparents that are probably living on a fixed income.
Exactly.
And
that is the problem. That is
I
the
have to
problem.
tell you-
Is there's
I
no.
have to tell you quickly, I was on my way to work one day and I stopped in to get some gasoline, and there was this older grandmother there, and she had two little ones with her, and she was counting out her pennies to get them a treat. And that stayed with me because I know how difficult it is, particularly nowadays, for parents to, relatives of parents of children to just survive themselves. And I think that is such an important thing. If the government is going to mandate this idea of moving back to kinship care, that it be supported. And I think it's almost building in defeat.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. We really tried to get subsidized custody here in Virginia and have had the plan and had the program ready to go and had it not signed off on by the administration. So it's very disconcerting that we have this focus on trying to find relatives, and yet we in this country think that, well, if you're a relative, you need to be providing everything that child needs when maybe you're only barely making it yourself. So I completely agree with you, and we have to continue to push on that issue, and that's something that Tom raised at the last webinar.
Thank you, Kate.
Thank you. And I think, Lisa Matthew, you had a question, and I'm going to find you and take care of that one next. I can't find her. Is she still on? Let's see. Don't see her now. Looks like Lisa had to leave us. We also, Therese, there was a question from a member saying that they heard from a member of the Permanency Advisory Committee that committee was discontinuing meeting. My response to that was there might be some reforming of the committee, but I think that committee is going to start back up, isn't it?
Yeah, they just did. They had their they had their first meeting February 20th, and if they're apparent, well, and I imagine they've scheduled another meeting for probably next month. I think if they are interested in being part of the Permanency Advisory Committee, Kate, they should communicate that to you, and I think you can communicate that to DSS.
Yeah, the Permanency Advisory Committee is a really important committee that actually Therese started. And if you are interested in serving on that, there's a lot of reading. Just prepare yourself. There's a lot of reading. And as she told you, if you're going to participate in the committees, you need to get yourself educated about what's going on in the system, what's changing and what's not changing, and be prepared to participate as a professional member of the committee. So let us know if you're interested, and we will forward that name on to the board, who will then take that to the department. And any more questions? All right. Having seen no more hands raised, I sincerely appreciate everyone's participation. We have some more webinars coming on our webinar Wednesdays. Look forward to having you join us. There will be newsletters that will come out with more information on what those are going to be. Thanks so much. Goodbye, everyone. Thank you, Therese.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night.